That's cool.
Yeah, it can be. Can be. Alrighty then. So we're starting to talk about RMF. It's a concept, practical application. RMF is the risk management. Now, like we talked about in the last class, this is mandated by NIST.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, DoD instruct. RMF is mandated by a DoD instruction. RMF is created through the NIST process. So it was mandated by DoD instruction 8510.0, is this one right here. I'm not going to read this. I'm just showing you what a DoD instruction looks like.
Yeah.
DoD instruction is a type of regulation, and it's basically telling you what you're. No, it's not optional. Okay.
Yeah.
So it goes through and outlines, as you can see, all this. And this is a typical military type of. You'll see all of this. Who sent it out, date, what the releasability is. So like this is cleared for public release, so I can show you this. Not cleared for public release, I could not show you this.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a thing, and it goes through and like reissues and cancels. This is a big one. It may, whenever you see a DoD instruction or any Department of Army memorandum, whatever, and it said reissues and cancels, it means it's an update and a supplement to a instruction or whichever type of.
Mm.
And if it's got an incorporates and cancels, it's the same thing. So the reissues means we are sending this exact same DoD instruction out again. Cancels the previous one because it's updated as new information. Incorporates and cancels means, hey, we've subsumed this other regulation into ours and it's canceled. It's not going to be called that regulation anymore, that directive or that instruction. It is now this new thing.
Yeah.
Okay. And who it's approved by. And all this stuff doesn't really matter a whole lot to you. I'm just explaining because if you get into the cyber framework, cyber aspect of working with the government, you're going to see this a lot. This is something that's to be very well aware of because, like, you may end up with an instruction that's like just 2 years old, but yet it's been updated, incorporated, something like that, and you need to know those things. How it's being reissued, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Also, by listing this, it also helps you understand what could be potentially confusion. So if this memorandum 004, blah 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 blah, was out there and you didn't know that it was incorporated and canceled, then you would be thinking, well, I've got conflicting information here. These two things conflict. How do I?
Right.
So anyway, this just talks about the RMF implementation. It talks about the steps here on this particular. One of the things about the documents is they are I should back up. Some of them are extremely detailed to the point where if you're not in DoD or that particular, whoever's issued the document, if you don't work in that on a normal basis, sometimes it could be to work it.
Sure.
So I've got an overview that we're going to talk about in a bit. But the good thing about this is you can see where it talks about the steps, right?
Mm-hmm.
It talks about the overview and the life cycle. It talks about risk governance, which we talked about. And then it breaks down about who the executive, cybersecurity, all those kind of good stuff. Not going over that right in this class, but just to let you know that these things are out there. this document and understand what we're talking about from the horse's mouth, because this is literally what tells you to go dress right, dress, do this, do that for.
Yeah.
Then it gives you a little more here with these tables. Right.
Cool.
That's the instruction that says, "Thou shalt do RMF." That's how you're good. Sense?
Yeah.
All right. So we talked about that. Now, we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but the individual controls, and you've heard me talk about security controls, right? Talk about that. So that is in the other. This is a massive document that's kind of a pain in the butt. Literally have to go 50 pages down before you start getting. Breaks down individually what all controls are. So remember where we talked about controls, what they are, and the technology. They can be based, they can be process based. This document literally tells you exactly what it is. Policy and procedures tells you what it is. Discussion about it, related controls, and it does a very, very good idea of talking about the high level controls.
Yeah.
So just to refresh you, a control is a process, a procedure, a policy, business process, technological process, technology in itself, right? To reduce risk, to mediate vulnerabilities, and to mitigate other vulnerabilities. That's what they're for. Get to that conversation, it's going to be talking about this in a little.
Cool.
Right. So RMF is a process that integrates security, privacy, and cyber supply chain risk management activities. So we've talked about that. We understand what security is. Understand what privacy is. And we talked in the last class when I asked you a little bit about what the CIA tried.
Yeah.
So confidentiality is the privacy part. Integrity is the security part, etc. And we also talked in the last class about a lot of the vulnerabilities in supply chain. Like in the middle, but it wasn't like technology. It was they were intercepting shipments at the loading dock and custom chips in them or custom board steal data.
Right. Yeah.
So the risk management framework was made after a lot of that stuff came out, and it's developed with the intent to take that idea of understanding your supply chain, understanding the vulnerabilities in your supply chain from that perspective, but also from the perspective of, and we talked about this in the last class, about how your supplier, if they have vulnerabilities in their system, right, where they could be hacked, or that's a vulnerability to you.
Yeah.
You remember the conversation? So I told you about the one defense contractor that I believe it was Lockheed Martin, that were they'd been hacked for like something. That's invested in there. So while obviously that company isn't the government, that company works for the government. A lot of the government data that Lockheed Martin had, which was government data, but the contractor had to have it to do their job, that was then leaked to whoever hacked their system. Right? So understand that, like, I'll give you another example. When I worked for an e-commerce company, I don't remember if they bought them, but it was an e-commerce company. And our systems, our inventory, and ordering and shipping systems were tied into the systems of our customers. Technologically, we were connected. So
Yeah.
when you would, let's say you went in to order something from Dick's Sporting Goods, right? Because that was one of our systems were connected. So Dick's Sporting Goods was affected by any security vulnerabilities that we had in our system. So,
Yeah.
for example, if there was a database flaw in our system as far as how we pulled customer orders and then tied to our inventory, that could be a database vulnerability to the customer, taking into account how those two systems and the customer account, speaking of exporting it, depending on how those two systems are connected and what kind of um, what kind of connection it is, if it's one way or two way, and then two, depending on the technological mitigations and protections that Dick's Sporting Goods have. So
Yeah.
they took that and they took that kind of understanding of vulnerabilities in the supply chain and implemented that across the entire DoD. Now, this comes into play because it could affect the actual military, right? Military logistics, which was also a huge thing. They found that they were susceptible to attacks that way. The military was susceptible to logistics attacks. So stuff could get shipped. Let's say you've got a unit out in Iraq somewhere. It needs this medical supplies, this food, armaments, right? You're able to attack the DoD logistics framework, whether it's technologically, whether it's personnel, right? You infiltrate personnel, whether you intercept a business process in some way, uh,
Hmm.
whatever, then you could prevent that unit from getting supplied properly, right? That's a huge benefit in warfare. So they took that and implemented,
Mm.
and they really drive that. There's whole DoD instructions. There's all sorts of stuff dedicated to understanding that supply chain.
Right.
So, like it says here, it's risk based. Um, it so what you're looking at is when we're talking about risk based for RMF. Um, Risk is based off of impact likely. Two main things that you base risk off of. There's a little algorithm to it and say if you've got this, you've got this, right? So and numbers are great. Don't mistake what I'm saying. But you remember the conversation we had about quantification versus qualification,
Yeah.
right? So quantification of risk helps business leaders aren't cyber people to understand levels of risk. They're taking quantification or the qualification of what you're telling them, reasonings, the actual critical vulnerabilities, risk, as far as the what, put a number to that so that a business leader can look at that and readily understand impact to the business, mission, to the system itself. It's an easy way to say, okay, our criteria here is we have a risk from 1 to 10, right? 1 being the lowest, 10 being the highest. So a business leader can look at that snapshot and look at a graph and say, okay, I've got here that are at the 10 level. Those are the ones I need to hit first. They don't
Yeah.
necessarily need to know that it's a man in the middle tag on the database. And
Sure.
the other one is don't authenticate with the SSL. And the other one is our database isn't encrypted. They don't need to know those things right off the
Hmm.
bat, right? The numerical part of it helps them understand where they need to dig. And then they rely on us as the cyber experts to explain the qualification. What does that mean? Take the
Right.
technical and then parlay that into business language. So an
Yeah.
unencrypted database, what does that mean? A lot of business, I'm not going to say a lot of business leaders because it's more common now, but there are business leaders out there who are totally operationally based, and their thing isn't IT, and they're going to go, okay, what does that mean to me?
Yeah.
Right. So it consists of 7 steps: prepare, categorize, select, and assess, authorize, and enter. Now that is, get to the monitor piece, that goes right back in. It's called a life cycle. So you'll hear life cycle a lot in IT, business, process, right? Because your life cycle starts here all the way around to where you come back to that first step again. You keep improvement. We had that conversation in the last class.
Yeah.
How we go down, and you're constantly cycling that improvement, right? So that's very important to understand those steps. And then what does that mean as far as a life cycle? Now, the big thing here is RMF supports continuous monitoring. That was a huge thing that got implemented shortly after they implemented RMF, was they really put a focus on continuous monitoring. Now, we had a little bit of discussion about that before, but I'm going to get on this. So when you implement whatever, when you implement a process, implement a procedure, implement a new system, one of the things you have to do, you implement controls, right, is you have to continuously monitor what you've implemented, make sure that it's efficient and effective in what it's supposed to be doing. So, like, for example, RMF, right? So I get to the prepare, I categorize, I select, I implement controls, I assess those controls, I authorize the system, which is, we'll get to that, and then continuous monitoring is the monitor step, right? So the reason I'm doing that is because as technology advances, we've had this conversation, as technology advances, as there's new systems and as new vulnerabilities are discovered, you have to keep monitoring your systems to understand what your current implementation is effective and efficient at versus the new information.
Yeah.
Right. So, because if you don't, right, so what's the name of it? I can't remember particular ability top of my head, but it was the one that affected the Spring network, Spring application, a couple others. I can't remember. I'm trying to tell you, but it was a huge vulnerability, right? Huge vulnerability, and when that came out, I mean, it was like a root level vulnerability. How devastating it was, and it was the under of applications, databases, and everything. And if you don't go back and continuously monitoring those things, let's say I implemented the fix. We got the vulnerability. Okay, I know there's a vulnerability. Right? Got notified there's a vulnerability. But we implemented a fix. Well, was the fix effective? Current technology, somebody can implement a fix and send you a fix and think that that fixes the vulnerability because it did in their testing environment, right? Their testing environment to have tested that fix doesn't take into account your configuration and your environment. So you
Right.
have to go back and say, okay, we implemented the fix. Now let me monitor the system and make sure that fix was effective, it was efficient, didn't break something else, because you know how Windows updates a lot of the times break other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what you're doing. You're taking a look at that and you're going, okay, here's where I'm at, and now here's the deltas. Here's what's broke, here's what's not effective. And you may not have any, but you don't know until you go back and effectively do that continuous monitoring.
Yeah.
So it's a huge thing with RMF right now, is that continuous monitoring. And it's supported by various publications, blah, blah, blah. So again, this graph shows you the risk management components. This isn't the RMF components. This is how you understand risk management, right? So you identify systems and everything. You identify what you are to protect, measure, and assess. mitigate, report, and monitor. Right. So the mitigation here is we're reducing those vulnerabilities. We're reducing that control, and we're going to report and monitor. This is kind of like your continuous monitor, but for risk, and then governance, because you go back to governance to control the risk. They need to understand what our situation is. This governance piece is like your auditing. Talk about that. So understand that goes back to your auditing. Well, then that comes back to if we audited, then we may identify new risks, new vulnerabilities. Right? All of this is about risk versus the RMF control steps.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
All right. So when you're talking about any framework, doesn't matter what framework it is, but specifically in RMF, you have to understand what, do that by assessing all of what are your threats. Right? Like in the military, it's easy to say threat because you're thinking from a militaristic standpoint, right?
Yeah.
But what is a threat? Give me an idea what you give me a couple of things what you might think is a threat to an organization. Talking about this type of risk thing. I'm going to say from an IT perspective. I'm not going to throw a loop at you and say a business.
Okay. From an IT perspective, it could be just an unconfigured default password. It could be a disgruntled employee. It could be just carelessness of a work computer. And not
your first one was a vulnerability.
Okay.
Okay. Because that's not a threat. The threat is somebody who's going to act on it.
Yeah.
Now, the disgruntled worker is a great one. The careless one is great too, because that is a threat. Carelessness is a threat because that is somebody performing an action, right? That is an actor upon you. A careless person is an actor. That's part of what's called an insider threat. You ever had any lectures or classes on insider threat?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay, well, just know, take this away with everything you've been told. Understand, your biggest insider threat is not the intentional person.
Yeah.
As an aside, it's not somebody who is intentionally trying to sabotage you from the inside. Your biggest insider threat is carelessness and complacency. So when we talk about threats, a threat could be a hacker team who's targeted your business for a specific reason. That could be nation state hacker team, or that could be like the hacker team that exposed Sony because they knew that they were exposing all the players' informations back in the day during the PlayStation.
Yeah.
They didn't do it to be malicious. They informed Sony that they had a massive security breach. Sony didn't do anything, so then they hacked them and took them hostage.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it was right. I'm just saying that that's one of the actions that an organization may take. Of course, now you know all the ransomware attacks. That's a threat.
Right.
So lots of things that can be considered a threat. The vulnerability is the exposed thing, like you said in the first one, secure password. A vulnerability could be, like I mentioned earlier, that could be an unencrypted database. Right? It could be not using SSL for your data connection, your network connection. It could be you've got an application that you coded that is transmitting username and password in the clear, encrypted.
Mm-hmm.
It could be, those are vulnerabilities. So impact, and we're going to talk about impact because impact is huge, but most people don't understand the difference between impact and consequence.
Okay.
So impact is what that did to the organization. Right? What did that exploiting that vulnerability do to your organization? So you have a threat, there's a vulnerability, they exploited that vulnerability, there was an impact to your organization. Now,
Right.
the difference between an impact and a consequence, right? I'm going to talk about here. I'm going to ask you a question first. So in the unsecured password thing you said earlier, right?
Yeah.
So threat exploited the password. What was the impact? In your mind right now, what's the impact? So they exploited the password. What's the impact?
Access to the whatever computer, access to the server.
No, that is the consequence.
Okay.
Right? It is the result of them exploiting the vulnerability. Right?
The impact is?
No, the consequence.
Okay.
The consequence is the direct result, what could happen if they exploited the vulnerability. Right? So I exploited the password, I got access to the server. Right? How does that impact the business, the organization? Impact is couched in terms of, so they exploited the password, they've got access to our server. The impact is our data on that server is vulnerable. The data on that server has no integrity.
Yeah. Could losing trust be an impact?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Dependent. Now that's not on every system. You're going to say losing trust. It's going to depend on your system, right? So if like you're an e-commerce business and they've got into your ordering system, then obviously there's trust issues because you can't validate that those are legitimate orders anymore.
Yeah.
Right? So absolutely. Likelihood is likelihood. What's the likelihood of somebody exploiting this vulnerability?
Yeah.
So if my web server, right, has unencrypted authorization tokens, right?
Yep.
That means I could have a man in the middle attack spoofing the auth token because it's not encrypted, right? Or changing HTTP headers because you don't have SSL on it. What's the likelihood of them actually doing that versus I've got a Linux server that's running a database that's protected by firewall, layer 5 gateway. It's fully encrypted. It's encrypted with AES 256 or whatever. FIPS compliant algorithm. It's patched all the time. It's completely updated. Yet, vulnerability on that one is that username and password, no multi-factor authentication. What's the likelihood in difference?
Higher on that.
Lower on that one because it's behind all these firewalls, gateways, encrypted, and all that stuff. Get to it and exploit the username and password versus the web server, which is public facing.
Yeah.
Easier to get to in those cases because a lot of your web servers are either not inside the network.
Yeah.
So you have. So I'm just giving you those as examples of how likely is somebody to. An example would be, do you know about the Kias right now? About how vulnerable Kias are to being stolen?
No.
You don't know about that?
No.
Okay, so certain models of Kias from like 2015 or 2015 up to like 20 don't have the immobilizer of like trying to break into it.
Yeah.
It doesn't immobilize the car. All other cars do. Right?
Huh.
So like if somebody tries to break in your car and they fuck up your ignition, the car won't start and it won't move.
Yeah.
Kias don't have that. Right? So here in the last 3 years, the likelihood of a Kia being stolen is like 70%. people's kids are being stolen. It's so easy to get in.
Huh.
Right? So the likelihood of a Kia being stolen versus a Chevy is a lot higher because of that vulnerability.
Right. Yeah.
So that's a good way to think. Likelihood, talking about a vulnerability. Likelihood is just as important as your, because if I have a high impact vulnerability, but the likelihood of it being exploited is 0.1%, but I have a lower impact vulnerability over here, likelihood is 90%, which one am I going to fix?
Yeah, you're 90.
Right. I'm going to go for the 90% because that's almost a given. Now, I'm using extreme numbers there, okay?
Yeah.
Just to give you an example. So when you win a predisposition condition, that just means what's the context between all of this stuff, right? And how is somebody predisposed to do it, or what is the predisposition of the bone that's going to get hacked? Meaning, historically, have these things been hacked, hacking, or, and I'm just using hacking as a thing. It's not just about hacking, right? It's about numerous things. Carelessness, right? Misconfiguration. That's not always carelessness. That could just be a wrong based on bad guidance.
Yeah.
So understand all those things when I'm talking about, not just hacking.
Sure.
Right. So right here, just to be clear, vulnerabilities are weaknesses in the IT systems, security procedures, and controls that can be exploited by bad actors. So that's what a vulnerability is. So we've gone over that, and just understand again that those are the things that help you out. Those are the things that are going to happen. And in cyber, should be talking about all of these things in the context of risk. The whole. Don't focus just on the threats. Don't focus just on the vulnerabilities, which most companies focus on the vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, it's vulnerability, let's patch it. They don't take a look at impact and likelihood like your mature organizations do, like a Google does, Microsoft does, an Amazon does, whoever, right? But a lot of companies just patch and do this, or don't, right? Because they don't understand the overarching concept of risk to the organization. Don't prioritize. Fix, and spend a lot of stuff that they don't necessarily need. So once you've done that, once you've codified all of that risk, right? And remember, what's the two ways you're going to talk about risk? Talking to your business leaders.
Quantify and quality.
Qualify. Right. Quantify because you can give them numbers, rate it, prioritize it. You can qualify that with the context of the impact and all that.
Yeah.
Because let's say, again, going back to the example, if I've got, I'm going to add something to it, right? So I've got a high impact but low vulnerability, low likelihood vulnerability. Then I've got a high likelihood but a low impact vulnerability. Which one am I going to fix first?
High likelihood?
No. Totally dependent on the context of the vulnerability. So if it's on, if the one that we would go for, which is the high likelihood, if that's on one server, right, that's behind two firewalls and it's encrypted and all that, but the other one is on 200 servers.
Yeah.
Right? There's some context to that conversation. Now, obviously, if the impact is still low and it's on 200 servers, right? Just because it's on 200 servers doesn't change the impact because you're looking at in context of your impact, right? You're still looking at that. But then what comes into play? What drives a business?
You said what job is a business?
What drives a business? What is the main thing that
Oh,
drives a business?
well, money.
Right. So you also have to take in a look at account, right, on those risks. And you've identified this one, which you'd probably do first, and this one, which you'd probably do next. But if this one cost you $10,000 to fix, and these cost you $200 to fix, then what happens to your answer?
It changes
It
based
changes.
on the money.
Right? Or it may, I'm not going to say it's always going to change, right? In context, you have to understand the context. Excuse me. Always have to understand the context. But again, that helps understand how you're going to mitigate risk. So at your prioritization of your risks, right? Because that's what you're going to do. You're going to take all the risks you identified, you're going to prioritize them, right? But also you're going to, what is the mitigation? Because that mitigation is cost. Mitigation is how you're minimizing the amount of risk that you have based on those vulnerabilities and things. But how are you, that risk mitigation is the how that helps you quantify a bunch of other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that works in RMF, but it works in anything, even in business stuff that's not related to cyber, business processes, right? Some of the improvement stuff that we talked about. You're always going to go back and say, what's the cost of all this?
Sure.
Because at the higher, so do you know what risk transference is? That from
No.
classes? Okay.
Mm-mm.
Risk transference, and this is where I'm talking about understanding risk mitigation in context. Risk transference is the concept of mitigating risk, right, by putting that risk somewhere else. So, for example, let's say I am a small to medium-sized business. Specifically in this example, I'm a small to medium-sized independent hospital. Okay.
Okay.
I can't afford to have this huge IT team be on staff all the time and do all these vulnerability assessments and all this continuous monitoring. I mean, I can afford to get some stuff done, but I can't afford this large IT team to handle everything. And I know that hospitals are getting attacked for ransomware. So what I've decided to do is I've decided to buy ransomware insurance. Right? So
yeah.
I didn't necessarily fix the vulnerabilities because I couldn't afford the staff and everything else, but I could afford the insurance payments so that when I do get ransomware, the insurance will pay the ransom and I could most likely get my files back.
Right.
That's called transference. I took the risk from the fixing the vulnerabilities, right? And I transferred it over to the insurance. That's my mitigation.
How new is like cyber insurance? Is that
it's relatively,
yeah,
it's relatively, it really came out when I'm not gonna say it came out because there have been cyber insurance, but it really came to a head with the with the ransomware, where you have like insurance to cover like certain things. But also, don't think of it just as cyber insurance, right? So let's say I've got a vulnerability on a server that somebody could take my server down.
right.
So here's another risk transference. I have a backup server.
Mm.
So when they take that one down, I just throw the other production and go. Backups are a form of risk transferring. Right? I can't mitigate the fact that a server may go down. Hardware fails. We know that, right? So if I don't have a hot server backup, it's instantly going to kick over and has duplicates of the data, live real-time duplicates of the data. There's no company, right? They have backups. Backup is a way, so if the server goes down, build another server, I can load backups on it. Type of risk transfer.
Right.
So back to mitigation, right? There's all sorts of types of how you're going to mitigate something. Fixing it, whether it's risk transference. There's a lot of steps in there. We'll go over that when we get to that, because that's a whole risk class.
Yeah.
Not dealing with what we're talking about in this one. We'll talk about that if that's something you'd be interested in understanding. And we can go. So when we talk about risk reporting and monitoring, it's another huge thing, because if you don't understand risk, if you don't report it, how's it ever going to get
Right.
now? What's another reason that you want to report and monitor your risk? What's another reason?
Make sure you're actually securing yourself.
Well, that's part of your whole, that's all the way up to the risk mitigation. Yeah, kinda. But one of the things you understand with risk report is developing trends.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you don't risk report, can't develop trends on the vulnerabilities, the risk factors, all those things that can help you advance your cybersecurity stature. So if I come to find out that by my risk reporting, if I come to find out that my servers end up, every time I deploy a server, I end up with this new vulnerability. And let's say I'm an organization that does a lot of virtual servers up and down constantly to flex for capacity. Right. Well, if I do that and then all these servers keep popping with the same vulnerability, then that tells me I have a trend going. It's probably going to continue on, and then I'm going to do a root cause, and potentially I could find out that my server image is never patched with the vulnerability. We've only been patching the servers instead of the server image, which is a bad practice, right? But you wouldn't know that unless you were reporting those trends. You wouldn't know it. You would think, well, the server admin knows that. A lot of server admins, I'm sorry, nothing, they're not doing necessarily anything bad, but a lot of server admins, what they'll do is they'll patch it and go on. They know they have to patch it, so they just patch it instead of going back to patch the image. They'll just keep patching the existing server. Or it may be that they got told not to, and then when it gets reported up, somebody up above is going to say, yo, dog, I don't know who's not patching this, but let's go patch the image instead of sticking around.
Right.
Sense?
Yeah.
So that's another good one. Now a third effect is, depending on your organization, like an Alphabet or a Microsoft, you've got all these other all these sister companies under your parent umbrella, right? You want to report that stuff so other people in your greater organization can experience. They can learn stuff that you've discovered. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So that is risk piece. How you're understanding risk and governance, because all of that, at the very end, all of that pushes into your governance system. It's not just risk governance, right? It's not just risk governance, but all that stuff is going to be codified in your cyber governance business.
Yeah.
Because risk is a part of two things. So risk is a part of your cyber effort when you're talking about IT risk, but you're also reporting to your business governance, right? Because after all, at the end of the day, all of these are business processes. Regardless if it's IT or not, it's all about business, and they're all about business processes.
Right.
Right. So even though you're reporting to your cyber governance, it's still going to get reported to the overall arching governance of the business. So the steps of RMF. We're going to go back to the steps, and we're actually going to talk about RMF as a whole, right? Am I talking too fast for you?
Oh, you're good.
Okay. So first thing is the prepare step, right? So you would just go in and you would start with like assessing and stuff. Just go in and be like, but your prepare step is huge because you have to understand your environment, both technologically and business, because you need to understand how those two things relate. And we've talked about that 100 times about understanding the business process of the organization and how those things should align with your goals and your mission statement and all. The same thing happens with cyber. If you don't go in and identify what type of systems you have, you don't identify the scope of what you're trying to protect, you don't identify the boundaries of the system, especially in an interconnected system where I'm connected to a customer or a supplier, whatever, right? So you have to understand where your limits are. If you don't understand those things, it can't accomplish any of the protective actions. So the prepare step, you have to identify the people who are involved. Who are your stakeholders? Who are those stakeholders that I'm working with to form these risk mitigation actions, or implementing controls, or developing new business processes, or blah, 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 right? Those stakeholders help me understand they help me understand truly what it is that I'm protecting. And when I say what I'm protecting, I'm not talking about the IT. I'm talking about, I mean, the IT is there too, but I'm talking about the assets of the company that the IT tool is supporting.
Yeah.
Whether it's information, whether it's process, it's people, right? People. So you're going to establish your risk management strategy, right? So when you, in this step, when we're talking about establishing the risk management strategy, we're talking about a high level. We're talking about a high level. So what is the risk tolerance of the business? How much risk can the business tolerate? Risk tolerance is I can afford for my systems to go down for 10 hours.
Yeah.
Versus, no, I can't afford my systems to be down 10 minutes. Right? Library versus a hospital. Good example.
Yeah.
Right? Of course, the library wants to be up at all time, but you literally have a card catalog whereas a hospital, somebody could die. Right? So what's your risk tolerance? How are you going to assess that risk? Do you have a defined methodology in your business to assess that risk? Or do we have to develop one specifically for the cyber effort that we're doing? Already got a good risk assessment methodology, then we just incorporate.
Right.
Same thing with your risk response strategy. How are you responding to those risks? Right? Do you already have a framework? Is there already escalation procedures? Is there already a contact list? All those things to identify that risk within the business. Is that going to be the same for our efforts here? And then, of course, the risk reporting communication mechanisms. Those are critical. Once you're accomplishing work, you need to know ahead of time how you're going to report that and who you're going to report that to and via what method. Are you sending stuff out in emails? Are you sending it on chat? Is there a portal? Is there a ticketing system? How are we reporting that?
Yeah.
Then, okay, what are the laws? What are the regulations, policies, standards, and guidelines that apply to the system in the organization? So, like, for example, if I work at mom and dad's furniture shop, I don't care about NIST publications.
Yeah.
Right? They don't apply to me. They're regulations for somebody else. I don't give a shit. I'm private sector. Don't care. Right? I care what laws apply to me. Right? But you have to take the time to define what is applicable in the situation, and it could be different from the organization to the system depending on various factors.
Right.
The next step is threat identification. How are you identifying threats to your system? Or are you? Are you identifying threats to your system? Like mom and dad's furniture shop, probably not identifying too many threats to the system. They're just patching as patches are made aware and things like that. A mature organization is going to understand What is the threat? Is it internal? Is it external? Are you at the level where you have to fear a nation state hacker, or level where you have to face one of the hacking teams that are going to ransomware you? Or, are you just one of those businesses that's out there and okay, we got to do just good business practice, secure as best we can. We don't have a specific threat that's out there externally. So that means our insider threat, carelessness, and those kind of things are the one that's going to hit us the most.
Yeah.
Right. So then, taking all that, you have to understand what are my security objectives for the system and the organization. Right. I've already identified all those things. What in this action that I'm doing, whether it's implementing RMF, another cybersecurity framework, or whether it's just going back and implementing X, what's the security and privacy requirements? At what level do I need to protect things? So, for example, HIPAA is a lot more important than PCI DIS, credit card thing. Not to say the credit card thing isn't important, right? Because it is. It's very important. HIPAA just happens to be a lot more important. And you can get massively fined, shut down. Your business can be closed. All sorts of stuff. People could sue the absolute dog shit out of you for spilling their information, right? PCI DIS, you can get fined. And there's a couple of laws regarding that, but generally you're not going to get like shut down unless you do something really egregious. Nobody's going to die, from the information being manipulated, right? So let's say you broke into a hospital and you changed somebody's medication data, somebody could die. Versus you broke into a credit card thing and changed some credit card information. They're not going to die. It's going to affect their credit rating and some other stuff and their ability to purchase on their credit card, but they're not going to die.
Yeah.
So your protection requirements and your privacy requirements are a hell of a lot different, understanding the spectrum of your business. So then we're going to categorize the system. Once we've got all that, we're going to categorize the system. So you're going to categorize it using their impact levels on CIA, which we've talked about. So how does this impact my confidentiality? Right? Mm-hmm. Or what level? Sorry, this is the front side. What level of confidentiality do I need to have? So, for example, a HIPAA versus a furniture store, right? Totally different levels. I'm going to armor clad my HIPAA stuff. The furniture store, I'm just going to make sure that my credit card transmission stuff is protected at PCI DIS level.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm not keeping that information on my servers, so there's a lot less for me to categorize. Integrity of the data. So can the data be changed? So obviously, like we talked about the hospital, you don't want them changing medication data. That's not a thing, right? Definitely not a thing. But if somebody breaks into your furniture store and changes your order history, I mean, yeah, your order history's changed, but does that really do anything to you? You're not going to focus as much on the integrity for like your furniture history, sales history. Availability, that one's kind of self-explanatory, but hospital availability is critical. Furniture store availability, not so critical. Right? But you're going to rate those, and generally it's you go low, moderate, and high. Each one of those. So a system might be low on confidentiality, low on integrity, but high on availability. Right?
Okay.
I'm going to use the furniture store and kind of flip this one. So at a furniture store, you want your system to be available at all times because you can't sell anything without your system. You don't know what you have in inventory, right? You have no idea.
Yeah.
So for you, availability might be the huge thing.
Yeah.
And we're going to go back to a hospital and go, all of that's important. All of that's a high. Furniture store might be low, low, high. Actually, it's probably low, low, mod, but The hospital is high across the board,
Sure.
right? And that helps you identify later on when you're classifying threats against CIA, you know, right? So if I'm a high confidentiality, a low integrity, and a low availability, regardless of the threat and the impact and the likelihood, this also tells me against my system how I want to prioritize.
Yeah.
Right? Because if something, let's say I'm a hospital that's high confidentiality, right? So if there is something that is not hitting my confidentiality, and then I have one on confidentiality, even though the vulnerability for confidentiality may be lower than the one for integrity, because that is the thing I need to protect the most, that changes the context, the qualification part of the vulnerability.
Right.
Understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So within that, that doesn't change the vulnerability and its impact in its um, likelihood, but it's going to change where are we impacting. And okay, so now it's confidentiality. I've got to really that one. That gets a priority just based off where it's hitting me. And then you're going to document all your decisions in there. Why did you say it was high mod mod, or low mod mod, or low mod high, or high mod low, right? You have to document that, and you have to do it in such a way as that you're both quantifying and qualifying the information that is presented, right? Without context, and context without a rating that says this is where we're at.
Right.
So you have to be able to do that. Now, the reason you're going to do that is because that way, when you implement technologies, implement new strategies, when you processes, all that, then you're going to look and say, how does this affect that based off how I've defined it? So if I implement a new business process and that new business process hits my confidentiality, I need to know why. I need to know the why we rated that a high confidentiality to understand if this business process does actually impact my confidentiality.
Right.
Again, based on context. It may not. You may go into it and go, oh, well, this really doesn't affect my confidentiality. Thought it did based off of this, but the reason we rated that so high on confidentiality has nothing to do with this particular process and why we think.
Right.
So next comes the select step. The select step is after you've done your assessment, or no, sorry, this is before that. Based on your categorization of your controls, you're going, the categorization of your system, that tells you what type of controls you need to implement. And I'm talking all the steps up to that point, not just the categorization. So why is that? Well, because those controls are going to help define what you implement and how you implement. It's also going to affect how you purchase. It's going to affect how you develop new business processes.
Okay.
And it's all about context of your system. You're going to select the controls based off all the things you've done so far, and then it's going to help you establish the controls that are appropriate to your system and your organization. And then again, you're going to document. Now, you remember how I talked about controls at one point, and I said there's so many steps to it. Like you have to identify, you have to define, you have to document, you have to do that, all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
Remember that? So, and one of the things I said about document is you can define and develop and do all this stuff, but if you never document it, haven't really done it because you don't know what to implement.
Yeah.
Right. So that's why documentation is so huge, because you have to know what you're doing in a way that is sustainable and not just word of mouth that can be changed. have to have that document. So when you get into IT, there's gonna be lots of configuration documents, which is a baseline. There's baseline documents for stats. There's gonna be like a technical specification manual. There's gonna be an imaging guide. There's gonna be all these things, documents that talk about that consistency that you need, right? So then we're talking about implementation. Implementation is where you implement those controls, right? So you've selected your controls that you need to hit, then you've started to implement those controls. Now, when I say implement controls, I mean already selected what controls that are applicable to your system. Now you're actually implementing the business process, the technology, the configuration, and everything. Everything to meet those controls. So if one of the controls is us to implement encryption on data in transmission, right? Your implementation is I'm going to make sure all of my network connections are SSL.
Yeah.
And the appropriate version of SSL. That's the implement step. Or if the implement step, if the control is have to have a documented accounts management process, well, then I'm going to go and document how I handle accounts, right? Sense?
Yeah.
Now you're going to hear in this part, you're going to hear talk about security engineering. Talk about security engineering. So security engineering is like you're developing your infrastructure and you're laying out, this is how we're going to design the network. Pieces we're going to buy. This is how we're going to configure it. Security is now baked into those processes based on well, one, just modern cyber security, but two, in each framework, and RMF is no different. There are tons of controls about how you merge security into building the process, building the infrastructure. Do it up front. You don't just throw stuff out there and then apply cybersecurity, right?
Gotcha.
Think about it as the difference between an antibiotic and a Band-Aid.
Yeah.
Right. Applying cybersecurity later is applying it superficially and on top of, whereas with an antibiotic, it works with your system, right? So just think of it.
Gotcha.
The assess step. So you've done all the stuff, you categorized your systems, right? Established low mod or whatever. You understood your threats, all that kind of good stuff. Decided on your controls, you implemented your controls. Now you have to assess how well did we do? Efficiency, effectiveness, and risk mitigation. What are my controls actually doing that I've implemented? So if I implemented a new accounts management process, but it fails to outline the usage of multi-factor authentication in my organization, and let's say I do implement MFA, right? But I failed to document how we do it, that's a fail. I didn't do what I'm supposed to do because now I haven't stated how we're using multi-factor authentication, how it's implemented. So if we go to do a new system and we have to put new accounts on it, we can't go back and reflect standardized procedures for implementing that multi-factor authentication.
Yeah.
Makes sense?
Yeah.
I gotta quit saying that. It's my bad phrase. You know, everybody's got like their bad phrase they repeat all the time. That one's
mine. Oh, it's fine.
Huh?
It's fine.
No, I do not like that. It's a personal thing.
Sure.
So you're gonna develop and execute right here, like I said, a security assessment plan. So the plan has to be standardized. There has to be a good plan. There has to be a good approach so that as you are assessing across your entire organization, right, set expectations on both the assessors and what's being assessed, right? Set that expectation. You've done it in a way that is effective and efficient, hopefully. That's the intent. You've done it in a way that is sustainable across your entire organization. You don't have just like one that was here and one that was here and one that was here. You have to have one one plan that is sustainable across your entire organization. And it has to be repeatable.
Mm.
You have to be able to repeat that process. It can't just be a one and done. Yeah, you can sustain that one and done across an organization, but it has to be repeatable.
Gotcha.
Okay. Now you're gonna take the results of that analysis and to define that and refine that and present that, you're going to communicate that using everything you established in your security assessment plan. So if you said, I'm going to use this number scale to quantify, and these are the terms that I'm going to use to qualify that information, right? That's
Mhm.
what you need to use, because again, it goes back to people know what to expect. They understand the common numbers, the common language. It's repeatable, it's sustainable, right? And it's consistent. The other thing is consistency, because then when I'm getting all of these reports, right, the same terms are being used, same numbers are being used, et cetera, et cetera. So it makes it easier for leadership to understand what that assessment looks like. So then you're going to prioritize, right? You're going to prioritize those vulnerabilities and weaknesses based on those assessment results. Now, at this step, you may not necessarily, depends on how you set up your assessment process and how you go back and then say, here's how we're going to prioritize it. You may not be prioritizing at this level based on budget and money being able to spend. Depends on what level this assessment is being done. Some assessment matrices I've seen, like if it's done at a particular level, include cost factors. How
Yeah.
much does it cost to remediate this vulnerability? Right? Other ones just prioritize it based off the established criteria of what's the threat, what's the likelihood, what's the impact, and how does that affect our CIA triad. Then after that, they talk about the money because they're focused on the security first, right? The security mission, they prioritize that first, and then the leaders make financial decisions. They don't get involved in it. They just talk about what is our risk.
Yeah.
So you're gonna document that stuff, right? And you're gonna have what's called a plan of action and milestones. So this also helps because a plan of action and milestones is literally a plan of action. What are we gonna do to mitigate or remediate? You always want to try to remediate first. Remediate means fix, mitigate means reduce in severity.
Okay.
Okay. So the milestones are basically the within your plan, at what point, at what time are you going to do X part of that total action, right? So if I have to, let's say, for example, I've got to buy a new software, right? Milestone one is identify where I can get the new software.
Yeah.
And that's going to be 30 days from now. 30 days after that, I'm going to purchase the software. 30 days after that, I should be receiving the software licenses, right? And the software to install. 30 days after that, install software. 30 days after that, implement all of our controls and assess where we're at security wise. After that, did we end up, and once we do that part of the assessment, then we go back and analyze that against what our vulnerability was. But you see what I'm saying about milestones? Milestones are just steps. It
Yeah.
could be based off of numerous things. Usually it's a calendar date that somebody will put in there, and at this point we'll do this. But you'll base that calendar date off of the action and requirements that are necessary to steps that are necessary to complete the action.
Yeah.
They'll just attach dates to it so that way business understands how we're moving that forward and what and keep track.
Gotcha.
Okay. Authorize step. And this one is a step you won't This is a step you won't see in a lot of companies. At least call it as the authorized step. Basically, what that means is you've taken everything up you've got so far, you looked at everything in total, done your remediation, you've assessed everything, how effective, and then you've gone back if they weren't, gone back and done it. Then you've authorized that system, that software, that business process, whatever, to be put into effect. It means basically somebody has written off and said, yeah, go ahead and do that. Now, in the matter of a cybersecurity framework, it's very important because somebody with authority over that system has taken all of that information and approved the risk, the residual risk, the remaining risk for that to be put in place.
Right.
Now, why is that important?
Well, having another opinion and making sure, I mean, having someone completely stand off and understanding that, they're overlooking all the holes that might be in it.
A little bit further. You're right, you're on the right track.
It also creates, like, there is kind of, it follows up on the standardization a little bit, because it's like it's creating a repeatable action. You want someone that knows their shit to make sure it's okay.
That's usually not the case. Usually the person who authorizes it is somewhere up in management, so they won't necessarily know the details. You'll present that to them, and then they'll take action based off the business impact and all that.
Okay.
What you're looking for is the first two things you said, but then also so you have a process so that unauthorized and unknown systems, applications, business processes can't be put in place that create a vulnerability to the organization or add additional risk to the organization.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if I have to authorize a system, then I know that as long as my processes are followed, that there can't just be some rando server somebody established on the network.
Yeah.
Right? Now, the trick is that somebody may not be somebody internal. A threat actor could have broke into your system and established a virtual server. That's very
Yeah.
unlikely. I'm just trying to give you like a stark example, right?
Yeah.
That's so highly unlikely. It's but because you have a process, know that all your systems have been reviewed and approved, and therefore you are controlling risk to the organization versus just people randomly throwing systems or applications or new business processes in.
Right.
And you're going to document who made the authorization decision. You're going to document what the system is, system details. You're going to identify who is the system owner, who's responsible for the system, but also who is the information owner, because they may not be the same people. Who's the system operator? Now, I'm going to give you a good difference to understand system owner, system operator, and information. Right.
Okay.
So, Bob's Credit Bureau. He runs a, what do you call it? Credit union. Bob's Credit Union. Well, he doesn't have on-prem IT. He uses cloud server.
Okay.
For this particular aspect of his business, he uses the cloud server. Right? But information on this is from a finance company. He's working with a finance company to finance cars. So all the information on this particular server comes from the finance company. Right? Now,
Mhm.
system owner is who?
The business.
Bob's Credit Union.
Yeah.
He owns the system. He may not own the servers, but understand when we're talking about a system, not necessarily talking about the servers. Who's the system operator?
The server company. Or the,
Oh,
yeah.
everyone's actually operating the servers. Half they're maintaining them. Who's the information owner?
Uh, Bob.
No. The information owner is the information that comes from the finance company. They own their.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean,
Okay,
it is what it is.
So think of it like this, right? When you put information in your Google Drive, who owns the information?
I mean, Google, I
No.
guess.
It's your data. It's your information. It's your documents. You own it.
Okay.
Right? Google at that point is both the system owner and the system operator. They own the all of the data center, but they're also system operator. They're operating and running it, and they're also the system owner because they own the cloud. They own Google Drive.
Yeah.
But all the data in there is yours. You're the information owner.
Okay.
Does that give a good analogy?
Yeah.
So just think about that. Healthcare data. Whose information is it? Right? Is it yours or is it that hospital's?
It's yours.
The hospital.
Okay.
Because they own the tests, they own the results, and all that stuff. They own all that stuff. Now, granularly, it depends, right?
Yeah.
It depends. But they're considered the information owner.
Yeah.
Now, the IT system and all that, say whether it's integrated. But anyway, you're going to document all that stuff. The reason you document who's the system owner. So if I have to replace a server, who do I need to talk to about replacing that server? System owner.
Yeah.
Right? If I need to talk about patching vulnerabilities on the server, I'm going to talk to the system operator. System owner doesn't give a shit. They own the server,
Sure.
but they're not operating it at that level.
Yeah.
At that level. And then the information owner, if there's information on that system, I need to be able to know who the information owner is to be able to talk about how we're protecting that information, et cetera, et cetera. Because at the end of the day, they're responsible for that. That makes sense?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then last but not least, we go to the monitor step, continuous monitoring. Right.
Yep.
First thing you got to do is you've got to develop a good continuous monitoring process program system, whatever you want to call it. That is step one. I don't care what this says. I don't care what this says. Have to implement that system. Now, for RMF specifically, it is outlined in these two documents. SP stands for special publication, which is different than an instruction. But special publication 800-137 and 800-150. They outline continuous monitoring. Like I told you, they really realized that continuous monitoring was a thing that they weren't doing. So they developed a very robust set of regulations and requirements to monitor all of that stuff. Second thing is you've got to collect all your data, privacy data, all that kind of good stuff, and your security data. Privacy data and security data, two different things. So just understand that the next thing you're going to do is collect all that data. So what you've already implemented, results from it, where it's at, yada, yada, yada.
Yep.
Then you're going to figure out what has changed when it comes to your vulnerabilities and your threats. That's going to tell you what you're looking for. If I don't know that my vulnerabilities or my threats have changed, i.e., there's a new exploit out there, that's what your threats and vulnerabilities are, exploits. If I don't know there's a new exploit out there, then how do I know if I'm patched against it? I don't.
Yeah.
How do I know my business process is robust against that exploit? I don't, because I don't know it's even out there. Right. So then you got to respond to the changes. Part of your continuous monitoring, you've got to respond to changes. So you've got to patch. Got to change your software. Got to develop a new business process. Got to implement a new technology, even if it's a piece of hardware. Right. For example, HP had a server that their firmware had a firmware level flaw that couldn't be updated.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. That was firmware. It's BIOS level, and the BIOS was not an updatable BIOS. Right. Specifically in the power management system to the BIOS that you could remotely log into, and then do what's called a permissions. To just slip my. Doesn't matter. It's where you there it is. Privilege escalation, or
Oh yeah.
that's where you log in. You can log in remotely, do a privilege escalation, and then get root access to the entire server.
Yeah.
Right. So in that instance, all those HP servers had to be replaced, or at least the boards did, because they were vulnerable in a way that you couldn't patch. There was very little mitigation to that specific vulnerability. There was some, and then the containment, eradication, recovery, root cause was all out there. As soon as they found out what it was, all that. But you're going to do that. So you're going to mitigate when you can. You're going to contain, right, when you can't. So do you know the difference between mitigation and containment?
I mean, mitigation, you're moving it, and containment, you're keeping it. You're like blocking it from going anywhere else.
Second part's right. Mitigation is reducing it.
Reduce.
Whatever way. Mitigation means to reduction.
Reduction.
And that could be severity, that could be impact, that could be likelihood. You're reducing any one of those factors to mitigate that threat or that vulnerability.
Gotcha.
Right? But then you're absolutely right. Containment means, okay, I've done all these other things, but now I've got to contain just this one server, this one processor, this one software, this one database, or whatever. It's only right here. And eradication, that's also
gone.
That's also called remediation. Yeah, gone. Recovery. How do you recover from an exploit or an outage, an incident? How do you recover? And then root cause analysis. Why did these things happen? You got to develop all of them. Just like any other process, this has got steps we want to follow because it gets us to a point. The root cause analysis is good for making sure we don't have trends, making sure that we have it fixed, understanding what caused it to begin with, being able to duplicate any of the patching, mitigation, containment, all that kind of good stuff, right? And then also understanding how we want to approach that moving forward. And then you're going to update the security plan, update the security assessment report, update the plan of action and milestones. You may have to update the authorization package based on what you have discovered in continuous monitoring, right? Because let's say you have to get a couple of new servers. Well, I've got to reauthorize those. So my authorization package is no longer. Sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So talk about benefits and challenges of good old RMF. So obviously benefits, it's going to improve your security. It's going to improve your privacy. Should improve your performance of your system and your organization if it's implemented properly. Right? All those things should make for smoother operations and become sustainable. it becomes consistent, so that as a business, you're able to implement easily stuff. So you're going to reduce risk. Obviously, that's the main thing, is you're going to reduce risk to the organization. But you're also going to reduce the adverse impacts on your organization, right? So I can't reduce my threat. I mean, maybe I can. It depends on what the threat is, right? I can reduce insider threat some. I can't reduce external threat, right? I can reduce my exposure, my vulnerabilities, and everything.
Yeah.
But again, so a third thing is we're going to enhance our compliance with whatever those regulations, laws, whatever the guidelines, the policies, whatever those things are, is we're going to enhance compliance to those. Those things are there for a reason, right? They're helping inform us on what we need to do. But additionally, this is going to help us get to that compliance level we need to be. So we know what thing. There's also, ethics and moral stuff in there to get to the whole different conversation. So my big thing is you're going to increase the efficiency and the effectiveness of the processes that you, right?
Yeah.
And that's part of the intent as well, is to understand what you're doing there. How am I improving? How am I doing the dress right dress? So challenges, and this is going to be for any cyber framework that you implement, RMF or something else. When you implement that kind of system, and we talked about this, but it's a lot of resources that you are devoting to that. Resources is money. Resources is time. Resources is effort. Resources is going to also be growing pains for your organization when you're something. It's a thing, because you could potentially have a short-term degradation in the effectiveness and efficiency of your current business processes as you're implementing new ones, and that's okay.
Yeah.
If you have to change your process and doing something, it takes a while for everybody to catch on. They perform less, so that could be a thing as well. There has to be a lot of collaboration, a lot of communication, a lot of crosstalk, a lot of cross-team type of engagement, and that can be difficult. Especially when it's something new that you're trying to do with all of that talk. So if you're trying to, implement new business processes, etc.
Yeah.
And you're always having to constantly adapt and your implementation of that framework. As you find discrepancies in your implementation, you have to go back and look at those things. Also, in the context of the systems, right? Whether it's a business process, with application, with server, whatever, right? Whatever that control system affects, you have to make sure that you've done it correctly and you've done it effectively and efficiently. If not, you've got to go back and reevaluate. It's part of your continuous monitoring process. And then have to have a balance between security and privacy requirements and what?
Money.
It ends up in money, but it's with your functional needs of your system. So one of the things you can't do is you can't secure something so bad that it takes somebody 3 times as long to do something, right? Or it prevents them from doing their job.
Right.
What did I tell you the most secure server is?
I don't remember.
A secure server is one that's unplugged. That's the most secure. But what are we doing with an unplugged server? Not a God blessed thing. You're not accomplishing the mission of the organization if I'm trying to be that secure. Another example would be I require different logins for each system that you use within the organization.
Yeah.
Shit, man, nobody's going to remember like 15 passwords if they use all these different applications. Not a thing.
Or if you like onboard somebody and it's way too hard for someone to learn.
Exactly. You've tripled your learning curve. That costs you money. It reduces the effectiveness of the business, etc., etc. So that is it. That is RMF over the specific RMF over cybersecurity frameworks. But that is the talked about that it implements security and privacy into organization as well as your supply chain. We kind of went into depth about talked about it's a risk-based approach. Identified how it's a risk-based approach. Talked about the 7 steps, not 6. How that works, and we'll get into a little bit more of that as we're talking about controls and things like that. Because the controls and how you're going to control stuff follow kind of this step. We'll talk about this class. We went into talking about continuous monitoring, how that's important, why we want to do it, what's the business. So understand, again, we're specifically, I was talking about RMF, but these things, except for the number of steps, these things apply to pretty much any framework. You're going to have a very similar kind of process to implement the system. Go in,
Yeah.
understand what you're protecting. Prepare to do X, Y, and Z by identifying stakeholders, stuff. Implement your controls based off what you said your system's security levels are, right? Implement them and assess them. And at some point, you're going to authorize the system and then continuous monitor that system. All your frameworks are going to have the same kind of thing, because it's just the way anymore businesses run, or business would run kind of haphazardly in some ways. This is mature. This is how we run. So, do you have any questions? And take your time.
Yeah. So this other document in here, we looked at the.
Oh, go over the controls real quick.
I meant the DoD manual. So this is like the other one that you showed me.
Framework for
yeah. So this is just like the big old book.
Yeah, the 8510-01. Yeah, it's like some stupid amount.
And that's specifically for the DoD.
Yes.
Or okay.
RMF, that's specifically DoD and the
Okay.
Now I understand though, as we've talked before, a lot of other organizations will this exact same thing. A lot of the other organizations, like partner nations, as they call them, Germany, a lot of what they call our partner nations, Australia, they will follow a lot of
they'll look at it
as our requirements, a lot of the way we do. They may tailor it and make it their own. They all look at this stuff is made public, right? And we've got the biggest and best military. I mean, other militaries will tell you that biggest and best, got the most advanced equipment. Got, and not that they don't do great things, because they do. Like I told you, partner up, so we learn together. They will follow a lot, and a lot of your larger organizations will follow this. If it's a privately held organization, that most of our public stock, all these exact things, they will implement guidance.
Yeah.
Why do they do?
I mean, someone's already done half the work.
Bingo. that is literally the reason. Government has done the work. They're putting all this stuff out publicly. Why shouldn't I do it? They're doing my job for me.
Yeah.
All I got to do is follow the controls, follow the regulations, follow the steps, and I'm much more secure.
Right. What is this cyberspace workforce qualification and management program?
Okay,
Is that a
so
framework or?
we're gonna talk about that.
All right. I'm gonna pee real quick.
Yeah, me too. I gotta pee.
Pee break.
Be back. Be right back.
All right.
Feel much better. I'm freezing because I don't have a bathroom in the studio.
I go out.
It's cold.
Yeah, man, it's fucking cold tonight.
Let's see where. Oh, that's the 81. Okay, so this document. All right. So you remember me telling you in one of our classes about, or maybe it's been one of base phone calls, about how you have to have certain certifications for
Yeah.
jobs. So come to find out, that got rescinded in
This
February.
did.
Yeah. No, not this. What I'm telling you got rescinded.
Oh, okay.
So they used to have this chart. Let me see if I can show you this chart. Okay. Okay. So used to had to have. So like if you were what's called an IAT, which is basically a technical person, information assurance technician or something like that. So there's three levels: level one, level two, and these were the certifications you had to have to be able to get that level of job.
Hmm.
And then it goes all the way up. So that's a security engineer, and all this stuff. So you had to have one of these.
Right.
And if you didn't have this, you couldn't get that level job. They would give you like 60 days or not 60, 6 months. whatever the time frame was. Like as a contractor, you had to have these start. Like an IAT level 3, have to have a CISSP or ASP-CE.
You have to have all of them or just
No,
one?
no, you just have to have one of them.
Okay.
Right, but look, there's no A plus. No A plus. A plus is only for that, just to get in, right? Security plus is only for a level 2.
Yeah.
Right? For a level 3, had to be a CISSP, one of these. But I said that the implementation of this, it got canceled,
Mm.
right? Incorporates and cancels. So it didn't incorporate that chart. There is no chart anymore, right? You can read through this. There is no chart. Basically, what they said was you have to look at, instead of just saying an IAT level, you had to look at job and its duties and the environment in which those duties are being performed to establish what your certification criteria are.
Okay.
So, for example, ISSO, which is an information systems security officer, which is basically like a cybersecurity analyst, right? That's the non-government thing. It would be called a cybersecurity analyst.
Sure.
I could say, using this old one as a guideline and understanding the job and the description and all that, I could say, oh, this cybersecurity analyst job requires security plus.
Yeah.
But I have another cybersecurity analyst job, right? And I need it to have this. It's not just about one or the other, because security plus is like a generalized, right? It's a generalized. But if
Yeah.
I'm focusing strictly on Cisco network that I need secured, I might require this.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not just dependent on what your IAT level is. It's not just dependent on this or that. And this goes to great lengths to establish how those job positions are sent out, how they're well, first off, how they're defined, how the certification requirements are defined, and then how that job has to be categorized and validated in the job description to meet what you've said you need for that.
Gotcha.
And it's a huge long program because it says a lot. It says a lot about what's, and of course also it's just one of the things that I tells you what person is supposed to do. That takes up half the document. The rest of it is like so simple. It's roles and responsibilities tell you all that stuff. But you have to read the whole thing because the roles and responsibilities and what they're supposed to do makes up the process and procedure development of the document. I get why they do it. But that's what this is. And I just sent that to you to like kind of look at it and
Cool.
so you can understand like I had told you that and then found out I was gone or actually February. That was while I was back. I didn't catch wind of this and I just now discovered this thing.
Mm-hmm.
So now they're doing the smart thing. They're basically making it like anything else. It's based on what the job is, not just some rando table certifications that may not apply.
Right.
Right. Because if I got a security plus and which is fine, but if that's all I got, but I'm wanting you to secure a Cisco network,
Yeah.
that security plus may not do me jack shit.
Right.
Right. I want that CCNA security because that's what I need to help me secure.
Right.
And that applies at the management level, applies at the engineering level. It's all context related on what the job is instead of that table. It helps. One, so what's the impact of that? So one, it helps get the right talent in the right job.
Mhm.
Government is highly restricted on how they interview. They can only ask certain questions. They can only do very, very limited uh, feeling you out in a interview. As
Yeah.
far as like this wide variety of questions, they can ask certain questions in a variety of ways, which gets it. But anyway, so what this does is it allows them to have those qualifications built into the job and get the more appropriate people for the job. Now, how does that help you and me? Well, that helps you and me because then we know when we're going into something if we're qualified to do the job instead of somebody else's, like the interviewee. It may not be their, um, or the hiring officer might not be their bailiwick. So they might, oh, well, you've got a security plus IET level 2, great. And knowing it's a specific network job, but none of the rest of the stuff you have is in networking. They're just looking at your security plus and going, "Yep, you're qualified. Great job."
Yeah.
Right. Well, now it helps them understand when the person writing the job description says, "No, I need a CCNA security. That's my preference. I've really got to have that." Then they know, because here's how it works: your job description is written by the operational people, and I've mentioned this before. Job description is written usually by the operational people who are doing the job or who are supervisors of that job. Well,
Yeah.
in the military, that gets sent out to somebody else, a totally different part of the organization that deals with contract. That, well, depends on who it is. If it's a contract job, they'll send it to somebody else to bid out the contract who knows nothing about what you do. They're only reading your job description and what you've put on there, and that's it. Right? If it's government for government, it still goes to a hiring agency, right? That's not you. It's not the contract company, but it's still a hiring agency. Like HRC uses one called, I think it's not BlackRock, it's something Rock. It's not BlackRock, but it's
Mhm.
something Rock. It's in a totally different part of the country. They have no affiliation with our organization whatsoever, other than they hire our people for it.
Yeah.
But if you don't know, I mean, if you just got some, kind of okay job description, but your certification requirements or other requirements are not tailored to the position, you can really get the wrong people. And I can tell you that is a thing because we have had, where I specifically worked in HRC, we have had tons of government people who got hired that should never have gotten hired for the job. Never.
Yeah.
Never got hired for the job. It's just a thing.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Yeah. So anyway, I just said that to you just for have a little have see what you could think.
Sweet.
That's all I've got for tonight. I know it was kind of a more of a lecture style than anything. I'm hoping that uh, looking at the notes that I sent you, kind of give you a better idea. Next class, we're going to talk about the controls.
Okay.
This class is going to be all about those controls that I sent you. I talk about that kind of in RMF. They say it focuses on risk management, kind of good stuff, which but RMF is really about control.
Yeah. Cool.
It's about all and how they and honestly, at the level you'd be starting a job at, that would be focused on anyways control.
Yeah.
That's all I got
Sweet.
for tonight. Are you good?